enough about me. What we're going to talk about today are disruptive innovations. And the two we're going to focus on are standards and technology, because at the next, what's supposedly the keynote, I'm going to talk more about the Common Core or Kansas College and Career Ready standards with a little bit of technology. And so it's going to deal with both standards and technology because they are both disruptive innovations. This little tool is also disruptive. Because if you touch it too hard, it just goes on its own. I hope we're a small enough group. I hope we have a conversation. So if you have questions, comments, want to argue a point, please do so. I get paid the same no matter what you do. That was a joke as well. Is it okay to laugh here?
Once in a while.
Once in a while, yeah. I'll try not to overdo it. Okay, first of all,
Where do you aim that thing? To the top or to the computer?
I don't think I can aim at all.
You don't aim it? It's
Scroll
wireless.
it to get it.
She was having, well, you were in here, she was having problems.
Okay, first of all, like I said, I'm not a techie. You've heard of the term digital natives, people who just take to this naturally. Digital immigrants, I'm a digital alien. I'm not sure I'm ever going to get it, but I get by. In fact, in the next presentation, I tried to embed a video off of YouTube into that video, and it was longer than what would let it, so only about 80% of it would show up on the screen, but I at least got it that far. So I called my son, who lives in town, and to help me with it, because he's pretty techie with the stuff that he does in his English classrooms and so forth. His son, my grandson, who's 10 years old, answered the phone, and I said, I need to talk to your dad. He said, well, you can't come to the phone right now. I said, what's he doing? He said, what he's always doing. I said, all right, I don't need to know any more than that. I said, I'm going to be over there in 10 minutes, and I need some help. So he said, yeah, come on over. So I went over there. He was still in the little room with the closed door. And Isaac, who's 10 years old, said, what are you trying to do, Grandpa? So I said, oh, I'm trying to embed this video in here, and it's too big. Like, do you know what to do? He says, well, I don't know. He said, I think you have to have a different app. And I wanted to say, all right, smart ass, tell me where this app is. He said, I don't know where it is, but we'll find it. So he goes and finds this app. He said, now download it. Of course, I said, how do I do that? He said, all you have to do is click on the dang thing. He said, click on it and drag it over there. And he said, then put that video with that app and then download it. I said, really? He said, well, it should work. He said, I'm not sure, but he said, try it. So we tried it. Sure enough, it comes up on the screen and it goes. And so, he didn't know the names. He didn't know the technical things about it. I mean, that's what this generation is really all about. Well, when you think about my lifetime, here's my father who came into his adult life with the steam engine. My son's generation, his grandson, his adult life came in with the search engine. The steam engine made a heck of a difference with life, communication, work, transportation. I mean, look what the search engine has done. And my grandson is everything. He got in trouble. He went to a different school, grade school this year. He's in the 5th grade. He got in trouble because in this school, which is a very diverse school in Lincoln, diverse in terms of socioeconomics, diverse in terms of race and culture, and it's one of the feeder schools to the middle school he's eventually going to go to, and it's right within a block of where his father teaches so that he could go back and forth with him. He got in trouble right away because he wouldn't write down his assignments in this planner book that they give him. And so the teacher got angry enough that he sent an email to his father, and somehow in the conversation he told me about it, and I had to pick Isaac up the next day or so, and so I went up to the classroom to get him, and he said, of course, who are you? And I told him that I was his grandfather, and he said, well, he needs to work on writing. He won't fill out this book. And he's one of these kids that if he doesn't want to do something, he's not going to do it. I have no idea where he gets that. Can't be kidding. It's a joke again. If I pause for a minute, that means I told a joke, and I appreciate it. Anyway, so we're in the truck going home, and I said, Isaac, what's the deal with the workbook? He said, Grandpa, he said, I have an iPhone. He said, it's all in my iPhone. Why? And guess what? One of the things he has is Evernote in there, and he knows how to use that stuff. And he has an iPhone with him all the time because he's a severe type 1 diabetic, and he has to have that in case something happens. He can get a hold of his father or a nurse right away and so forth. And he said, see? And then he starts flipping through there. I said, why did you show that to your teacher? He said, oh, I don't want him to know I have an iPhone because I'll get in trouble for having an iPhone in my pocket. Well, anyway, the world is changing. So, disruptive innovation. What is a disruptive innovation? There's two kinds. One is where you move a product up the scale of quality so that it maintains its current customers and probably adds a few. Like a Cadillac car, like a Lexus, like a mainframe or desktop computer. On the other hand, the other kind is where you actually move down the scale of quality. It doesn't have as much stuff. By the way, if you want this PowerPoint, Dusty will have it, or Denny can get it to you, and you're welcome to have any or all of it. They'll send it to you, or my email address will be on there. You can send an email to me. Or it goes down the scale so that it still has some very important features to it, but it makes it affordable to everybody. You know, like a Honda, like an iPad. You know, those things are very powerful, will do a lot of stuff, but they won't come close to doing what a desktop will do with all the stuff on it. But it makes it more affordable, and so when you think about the kind of things that some kind of disruptive innovations can do, they can serve two ends of the quality spectrum. One for those that want upscale and more stuff and fancier stuff and all that kind of thing, versus then this massive availability to other people, because the quality of it actually goes down in terms of its options, but it makes it more affordable. Well, that's what's happening with tablets, right? Everybody can almost afford a tablet. I think the last time I saw you get $69 tablets at Walmart. And they'll do lots of stuff. And lots of schools are using them. Most of the one-to-one things in Nebraska are tablet-based, not even laptop-based anymore, simply because of their availability. Is there a way to get this to go backwards?
Yeah, I think if you just roll it the other way.
Well, that's what I've been trying to do. It doesn't. It's going forward no matter what I do.
I think the last three presenters have had issues with this. It's not you.
Okay. I'll go run it from here. I'm sorry to be so far away from you.
I can press the button, show me what buttons to press.
Okay, let me get it back. Yeah, let me get it back too.
Or sending, do you have to use that clicker on the side of it? Because I think he was going from bullet to bullet to bullet. You might have to use that clicker on the side to go to the next.
Yeah, just put it down here.
We'll just let them do it this way.
Just say something.
Okay. Okay, and so standards and technologies are disruptive because here's what they do. They change the way we can do the work of schooling and education. They change the business itself. They change the results they get. And one of the most powerful things is the implication of standards for equity, because standards are supposed to be common, which means they're for all kids, not just the brightest ones, not just the fastest ones, not just the, you know, that kind of thing. And then technology makes it available virtually anytime, anywhere, any place, and those kind of things. Do you want to get that? What standards and technologies then represent what's called a paradigm shift. And you've heard of that term before. Go ahead and click it. A paradigm shift basically...
I'll tell you what, just wave your hand at me and I'll press.
Okay. What if I do this?
Well, then I can't.
What a paradigm shift does is change our sense of what a current reality is. That it's different than what we're now dealing with, and it creates a whole new future potential. Old products don't work. In fact, most people don't even want the old product anymore. And old processes simply produce slightly better old stuff. Okay? One of the problems, if you think about Cadillac for a number of years until the last 4 or 5 years, Cadillac kept producing old stuff, but nobody wanted to buy those big old 9,000-pound boat anchors that they had been, small buses and so forth, until they decided that they could make actually a sports car. And if you've seen that TV ad where the, or is that a Buick? I can't remember. The same kind of model where the mother is trying to feed this little baby, and she's playing airplane with it, and then the father comes in and makes the sound of his new sports car, which I think is a Buick probably, but Buick is things that my dad used to buy because he liked big status kinds of stuff and so forth. So, but new process, if we want something new, you got to have a new process. That's kind of basic. All right, when paradigm shift, here's basically the kind of things that happen. Everything goes to zero. Now that means everybody's an amateur. People don't like that for that reason, because we're in a field of education where we're supposed to know stuff. One of the reasons technology has such a difficult time being integrated is the fact that people don't like to think that they're ignorant. And they get overwhelmed if somebody mentions the word app and their temperature goes up, their heartbeat goes up. And the idea that you can make apps talk to each other just blows some people's mind, and they're so afraid they're going to make a mistake. And for 14 years in the Department of Education in Nebraska, we had PCs. And I had a ThinkPad, which is one of those nice little things, and I got pretty good at that. Except everything I had to do on there, I had to go through a training process because there was absolutely no logic to the way things were done on that PC. So when I left there, I thought, I'll try an Apple. That Apple computer sat for at least 6 months before I was afraid to even open it. And finally called this toll-free number at Apple and said, I want to learn how to use this computer. He said, well, what is it you want to do? I said, well, I want to get my email on there. He said, do you have it open? I said, yeah. He said, well, do this. Within like 7 clicks and probably a minute and a half, my email was running. He said, by the way, how old are you? So I told him, he said, don't fret. He said, there is nothing you can do to wipe anything out that we can't recover on that computer. So he said, the way to do things is simply to try it, because you can always undo it. If you can't undo it, you call us. We can undo it for you and get it back. You cannot lose a document on there. Well, that was somewhat comforting. I have succeeded in doing that since that time. So anyway, keep going with that. Here's what happens with a paradigm shift. We go back to zero. Everybody's an amateur. Very little expertise is there. And so you have to kind of reinvent the way to do this. And that requires adaptive work. In other words, it's one thing for an individual to create an app. It's another thing for 2 or 3 individuals or a team of people to get together and find a way to make that app usable by people. If you think about what Google does in its shops to create these things, these individuals are given the opportunity to create lots of individual apps, but they finally have to vet it through a team of people so that the actual use of that app makes sense. Not just to the folks who understand computers and talk the language and so forth. Now, one of the things, y'all know what that is? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People say, or folks say, people do not like change. That is not true. That is not true. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy, here's what happens when change comes or a paradigm shift happens. There's pressure downward. So whatever place you are in this thing, it tends to push you downward. So if you're at that level where belonging is the issue and you feel very comfortable, all of a sudden an innovation comes along or a change like technology, oh geez, I don't fit here anymore. How come other people can use these things so easily and I can't, kind of stuff. Whether it's an instructional strategy or not. People sense, and this is where I think educators get trapped so badly, is in that self-esteem category. Technology has a way of making you feel dumb. And I don't like feeling dumb. In fact, in most cases, I'll make it up long enough to get by if I have to, because I really don't like that. And being a few years over 50, the fact that I've got, you really believe that that's just a few years over 50? My first superintendent's job was when I was 11. Anyway, the point of it is I've been at this game for a long, long time. I've studied for a long, long time, read tons and tons of research. I want my expertise to be respected. But in the area of technology, that's why I'm not going to get into the applications of technology, because that is not an area that I feel very comfortable in. I don't have many friends in that area because they're all younger than me, for one thing. The point of it is when change occurs, or a paradigm shift, what people fear is loss. Loss of status, loss of a sense of belonging, loss of safety and security. And if you get an innovation, and it's down here, and it starts to shake people's sense of, do I belong here? It's not predictable anymore. You've made that person and everybody else in that institution or organization very vulnerable. And that's why stuff like No Child Left Behind sweeps the nation. Because you've got to get them vulnerable first. Then you can take them anywhere. It's the same thing that lots of other organizations do to kids in order to deal with things like addictions. Make them vulnerable, then you can rehab them. But if you're lost, think about it. No matter where you are, if you tend as a professional to be up there in the STEAM self-actualization, a change occurs. What you end up losing, self-esteem, the respect that you thought you used to have, all that kind of thing. Or if you're in that belonging stage, in terms of feeling like a part of a family, Common Core is having that effect on lots of people. I don't fit here anymore, and lots of folks 55 and over are saying, I want out, and they retire. And that's unfortunate. Okay. I've decided to redo Maslow's hierarchy to fit my grandson, and before he even worries about food, water, shelter, sleep, he's in, he's hooked in. This is a joke, by the way. I just created that on my own. But the minute his eyes are open, so is his either iPod or iPhone or all the other devices that he's got. Okay, standards disrupt, and they disrupt everything. At least they're supposed to disrupt everything. And the problem with standards, whether they be Common Core, college career, and so forth, we haven't let them be what they could be because of that Maslow's hierarchy thing over there. Because as a disruptive technology, they either should be taking us up that scale of quality, or they should be making it work for more people. And in my opinion, standards have failed to achieve either one of those. In fact, they've been more exclusive than they have been inclusive. They disrupt schooling. Here's the model that we practice virtually everywhere, whether it be in Kansas or Nebraska or New York or Florida, whatever state it happens to be. This is the model we practice. This is our mental model of the work we do. The mental model has boundaries. In other words, everything's time-based. 1,080 hours, 186-hour days, semesters, 9-week quarters, all that, 55-minute class period. And so then we take that time and decide it first. Then we decide how much curriculum we can put into that. Then we decide what it's going to cost to do that. And then through the Board of Education, all that kind of stuff, we approve a budget, and we act as if somehow there's something magic about K-12, and there is not anything magic about K-12. It's arbitrary. The reason why we have K-12 as it is because of child labor laws that go way back to the 30s and into the 50s and so forth. It really makes no sense whatsoever to have a K-12 organizational system. This is how your accreditation in your state works. You have to have so many minimum minutes of instruction. You have to have so many minimum minutes of instruction in order to grant credit. On and on and on. Your accreditation rule basically reflects this model. Now, it also disrupts our expectations because now standards are saying there's a different job to do. With No Child Left Behind, and I was not a fan of No Child Left Behind, and still not a fan of No Child Left Behind, and I'm not a fan of Race to the Top or any of that other stuff. However, it did say We got a new job to do. This isn't about my father's Oldsmobile, where it was okay for only 30% of the kids to get a high school education and go on to college. This is for every kid. This sets a finish line that every kid is supposed to get past, and now that's college and career ready. And so basically, we're supposed to be educating all the kids, and all the kids to higher levels than we ever have. And there is no data right now to show that that's happening. There are more kids being excluded today than there were 5 years ago, because test scores can be risen by excluding kids from the testing pool rather than working hard to get those kids above that proficiency watermark. Yeah.
It's not long to go. Now I'm thinking we're locked up.
Well, I'll hold these pictures up.
I'm gonna go down, I forgot where I was.
Right up here at the top. No, I'm sorry.
This one?
Keep going, that here, yeah, go to the next one. Here's the model. You've heard of the term think outside the box? Thinking outside the box is not a helpful disruptive technology because they tend to simply pick a piece of that old schooling box and try to work with it, like take time, make it year-round schooling, extend the school day, you know, do flexible schedule plans, kind of things and so forth. And basically that doesn't change anything about the box, it just changes the time. Because the problem with the schooling box is that the learning outcomes vary. And if you have standards, the learning outcomes are not supposed to vary. Those are for all kids. You should vary the time and all those other, the curriculum and all that stuff to make sure all kids get to that finish line. Now, they don't have to all get there on the same day at the same time, unfortunately, that we seem to can't get over. But basically what this box is trying to say is, let's don't try to do that. Let's find a new box to think inside of. And this is an education box. When you begin with outcomes, like college and career-ready standards or Common Core, and then basically you create opportunities so that every kid can get there, which may or may not be time-based, which may or may not be involved going to school, actually, or to what we know as a school. And maybe we ought to organize P16 instead of K-12. There's deal with the kids before they get to us. How do we then connect it to where they go afterwards? College, career, that's what that idea is about. And then maybe instead of organizing it by ages, which is another time-based formula, is that we ought to, students ought to progress based on a learning plan. And when you master this thing, you go on to this thing. When you master this, you go on to this, and so forth. And that's a whole different model. I don't think we'll ever totally get there, but somewhere way past halfway between the schooling model and this model is the intentions of the disruptive technology of standards. That's what it's supposed to do. Okay. So, if you then have the standards in terms of being a disruptive innovation, it basically redefines the structural core of a school. On the left, that's the way we're organized now. The local level, teachers, principals, superintendent, board. The state level, you've got the State Board of Education, the legislature, the governor, the commissioner. I may have that slightly out of order. And then at the federal level, you've got the U.S. Department of Education, Congress, and the President. That thing on the left has no structural core to it. The state is not the structural core of the education system. It's trying to act like it, especially now in Kansas where there's a bill to do away with the Common Core and everything associated with it, the data system and all that kind of stuff. It's trying to act like it, but the state cannot do that because it won't put the resources in the first place to make sure it'll be done for all kids. So, how can it, take a part of it and say, no, we're not going to do this? There should basically be no local, if that's the case, if the state's the central part of that structure, there should be no local funding of schools. It should all be state funding. It's their enterprise. And constitutionally, quite frankly, it is, except in your Constitution it also talks about local governance, boards of trustees and things like that. Well, the point of it is where's the work being done in the left-hand system? Clear at the bottom on the left side. I think that's just amazing that we tolerate this system when the real work that makes a difference is being done clear down at the bottom. And so when you get people up on these upper levels, I mean, at least at the local level, you can have face-to-face conversations in most schools. These people don't ever see these people down here, and these people don't even care about what these people are down here. And in fact, they make all kinds of assumptions that they're inept, incompetent, and unwilling. However, if we would think about it in terms of what the standards are saying, the core would look something like what's on the right, where there is a structural core, something that's in the center, and the rest of the stuff would be rings around that center, but not in a hierarchy. Like that. Classrooms should be the center stage. That's where the work is being done. That should be the structural core, and it should be no doubt, in at least my mind, that the job of the principal is to support the classroom and the classroom teacher and the kids in it. The job of the superintendent is to support the principal, who then supports them. And the job of the state and the federal government ought to be to support them. And wouldn't that be nice if they get engaged? Okay. Because once you know where the structural core is, then you also are clear about the core work. And I love this slide. Teaching is a reflection, or learning is a reflection of teaching. And that's the core work of a system based upon standards, because standards are to say, that's what we do, the place that teaching and learning occurs is in the classroom, that's got to be the structural core of the system, or the system will not work. I can't tell you how many over the years, and still do, run into principals and superintendents who think that the work they do is the most important work in that system. And it isn't. It's the work that teachers do in the classroom, around which everybody else's job has got to be tailored, because it matters where you start. If you start defining the work at the federal level, you get things like No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, Smarter Balance, assessment systems, and then the state people think they know, and they add to that their own things, and before it finally gets down to the people who really do the work, everybody else has taken their piece of it and defined their role first. And so the only thing left for a teacher to do is to shut the door and push content into kids' heads. And that didn't work. It also disrupts. That's all right. Let's do this. Go ahead and get it. In the old system, when you started at the top, and basically it was the board's job was administrative oversight, the superintendent was the manager, the chief manager, principal was instructional leader, teacher was simply a teacher. Because that's all there was left to do, because you defined them from the top down. In this new system, you start at the bottom, and the teacher is the instructional leader. It's the teacher who's supposed to know their content, the strategies that go with that content. What do poor kids need? What do kids of color need? What do kids who are learning the English language need? And so forth. And then when you define instructional leader, it changes the role of the principal. Their job is not to be instructional leader. It's to be leader of learning. And so when as a leader of learning, and we're having a faculty meeting, what we're going to talk about is who's learning, what are they learning, who's not learning, what is it they're not learning, what can we possibly do about both of those to keep them moving forward. That's the conversation of the leader of learning, not the methodologies you use to teach French. And here I am as a biology major. How would I know anything about French? How would I know anything about family and consumer science or any of those other kinds of things? Then the superintendent becomes an education leader, the CEO of an education system. And when you see that happening in schools, both here and in Kansas, it's a whole different school system when the superintendent sees himself as the leader of the education system, not the manager that's working on behalf of the board. And then the board's role changes. So, standards disrupt. They can change roles, relationships, and they can change how people work. They disrupt classrooms. This is what a standards-based classroom would begin to look like. And we're never going to be able to claim that we're doing standards-based work until our classrooms reflect it. I work with 5 other people who are doing coaching for states like Kansas in the implementation of the Common Core College and Career Ready technology standards. And I work directly with Mississippi, North Carolina, Kentucky, Iowa, Kansas, Colorado, and Department of Defense schools. And basically, they're all having this difficulty. They've pushed those standards down to the schools, had workshops on what they mean and so forth, but they have almost no evidence of this in their classroom. If you were to videotape their classroom over a period of a month, you would never see this in most of the cases. North Carolina started to get some of that and has some, in fact, you can go to their website, their department website, and see some small little video vignettes that they created so that they could show people what this was supposed to look like, but they were created classroom events. They weren't, natural ones, but at least they've got something so they can say, you see what this looks like? You begin with the end in mind. Content is simply a vehicle to an outcome, but the outcome is a thinking skill, a problem-solving skill, and so forth. It's never an outcome. You integrate assessment into it. Well, you can see the rest of it.
I think they just upgraded.
They disrupt schools. I don't know how many schools are now doing PLCs. And so many of them look like Book of the Month Club or Topic of the Month. When what the conversation should be, teacher to teacher, teacher to administrator, is who's learning, what are they learning, who's not learning, what is it they're not learning, what can we do about that in terms of strategy, opportunity, and so forth. And then it should, eventually move itself into what's the professional development need, how do we develop the capacity, do we need additional resources, those kind of things. But this should be what the conversation is. If it's about standards, here's the issue. Our real work, I don't care whether it's in your classroom, talking to your students, in your school as the principal, working with your teachers, in the district in which you're working with your principals, is your job is to create opportunities to learn. So that every kid has a route to the outcome. And that isn't the same for every kid. That isn't. It can't be. Otherwise, you have no hope of everyone reaching those standards. Again, the standards represent a finish line, but it's not a finish line every kid has to reach at the same time at the same place. And every time you do annual testing, you're creating a false finish line. Okay. Technology also disrupts. This is something you're obviously familiar with, especially because school can be anywhere, anyplace, anytime. I'm amazed at the 35 to 45-year-olds that are in my program, how much technology they already do and how much they've been adapted to. We don't hand out a single piece of paper in that class. And for me, I love stacks of paper to hand out because it was something to do to kill time. And now we put it on Blackboard, or we use Evernote, we use Google Docs kind of thing. Everything's done in a team setting kind of thing. And if it wasn't for technology, there would be no way in the world. And so the preparation to come to the classes that we have is reading all the stuff, having a conversation with the team you're working with, because when you come, you get right into your group and you get to work producing some kind of a project or product that we've identified for them to do. In that video in the next session, a kid named Logan talks about Starbucks as a school that he goes to all the time. It disrupts learning. One of the if you say, yes, we're a standards-based school, and learning and teaching in your school is not learner-centered, or everything learner-centric if your school is not learner-centric in everything it does, you're not a standards-based school. It's all about what students are doing and how they're being taught and what they're being taught. That's everybody's job to make sure that's working for every kid. And those are basically some kind of things that describe the same thing. Flipped classrooms, I couldn't go back. I love to lecture to people because I think I know something after all these years of being an administrator and a teacher and so forth. The content, the shelf life of that content is about 10 minutes. And they start forgetting significant shares of it. It's amazing that now after 3 years that something will come up and they'll say, well, do you remember back February of 2010 when we talked? Oh, it was because they were engaged. It was their stuff. They created it. And when they report out to their peers in these things, that peer accountability has just been incredible. I couldn't go back to a regular classroom to save my soul. I just couldn't. Well, they wouldn't let me, for one thing. To see the kinds of results that we're now getting from turning that whole thing upside down is just amazing. No, that's for now. With technology, equity of opportunity is no longer a function of advantage. We have a little school. I'm guessing there are 210 kids, K-12 in this school, out in the sand hills, which is in the middle of nowhere, about like Admire is up here, not only 99, as I went ripping through there 100 miles an hour, didn't realize there was a speed limit, and then wondered when I saw it why there was. That was a joke.
I laughed.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, where was I going? This school is 60 miles from another town, out in the middle of nowhere, and they had a principal that went to one of our Apple workshops where every principal that went to this for 2 years got a free Apple laptop. And this guy was, at that time, I think 56 years old. He ran with this thing. He kept calling me to come up and see what they were doing. I thought, oh, yeah, right, because I knew this guy. He was a nice guy, but I thought, if anybody was a pedestrian in their own life, this was this guy. You know, he wasn't doing a bad job because he loved this little town, they loved him, and so forth. And finally, I didn't have any other reason, and this took a year for I had to go up through that town or by that town to go to another meeting. I said, okay, Dan, I'll stop. And so I did. I was just dumbfounded with what they were doing. But as I was sitting there talking to the board that night, I said, how are you going to sustain this? Because every kid K-12 had a laptop. And they said, well, that's, of course, the problem, but we're committed to doing this no matter what it takes because of the kind of things that these kids are doing. Example being, fourth graders developed this history of the county, tracing every homestead and the families that had lived on those homesteads clear up to the current day. Well, the Historical Society had been trying to do this for like 30 years and couldn't get it done. Well, now it's on the website. And so the Historical Society is now raising funds to have these fourth grade kids do these history projects of local things of local interest that the Historical Society could never do. It's just it's amazing. And they created a corporation at the high school where they build projects for companies in this community 90 or 60 miles away that require design work, they require understanding physics, and so the kids are in these teams. And so in the physics class, they do the transmission of light, amps, all that kind of stuff. In the math class, they do the design stuff. It's just an amazing thing. Well, anyway, we were sitting there that night, and as I was walking up the front sidewalk, they'd taken the grass out and put rock from the sidewalk up to the building. And I thought, geez, I can understand you don't want to mow grass and all that kind of thing, but it looks like it. I mean, it just doesn't look nice, you know. And I said, what's the deal with the rock out there? Well, a lot of our kids don't have the internet at home. And so they drive their cars right up next to the school so that their computer will latch onto the internet in the school building. And so we decided to put the rock in rather than let them tear up the grass all the time and had to fill the ruts. So we just let them drive right up next to the building now. In fact, we've had a lot of adults that you'll see there on Saturdays and Sundays drive right up next to the building, and they're sitting in their car working on their laptop. It changes equity. It's immense. I mean, it's huge. Okay. It's going to disrupt public schooling because I think public schools, in my opinion, are not for long in this world. What bothers me to say that, but what they're going to become is a place where you go to be assessed and to be given a certificate that you've mastered a certain thing. And collecting these mastery certificates then determine graduation, whether you're college or career ready, and so forth. And I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but I think that's what their job's going to be. They're going to be brokers of opportunities. Okay, so you want to take, and in your math course, you wanted to learn some things about mechanical engineering. In that, okay, the school's job is to how do we hook you up with opportunities so you can see the day-to-day application of mathematics to mechanical engineering. Public education is going to survive, and it will survive in the form of the standards. In other words, we're going to say every kid in the state of Kansas from the ages of 5 to 21 should have access to a public education that does the following. Here's math, here's science, here's language arts, here's social studies, here's whatever, reading, all that kind of stuff. That's going to be the definition of public education. Where you go to get that may or may not be a public school. Because you may do it online with all the massive stuff that's out there to do those kind of things. I think that public education is going to be the universal civil right, but not going to a public school. Now, what that's going to do to athletics, I don't know. But basically, athletics probably do more to keep that schooling model in place than anything else. Because kids at 3:30 got to be out on the football field, and Friday nights you got to have a football game. And if you can't tell whether kids are high school in their curriculum or not, then how do you determine eligibility? Well, club sports don't really have a problem with that. Maybe in schools we ought to emulate what club sports do. And I honestly think technology can be the catalyst to a voucher system. You're going to have a voucher for a public education, you take it wherever you want to, including Starbucks. Now, that shouldn't scare us, because it's going to go there whether we want it to or not. And it'll either go there with us helping to, as educators, helping to design it and create it, or it's going to go there with us kicking and screaming by others. Because that stuff's already out there. There are people now who claim, well, all you have to do is, have you done any textbook selection in the last 4 or 5 years? There isn't a single textbook company that doesn't claim alignment to the Common Core, even before the Common Core was out. And they're running the show. They're at the table when these groups that write these standards are writing them. The companies are at the table. They know the minute those things are even in the design phase, what to begin to do. And you're going to find universities starting to compete for this, including this one. You're going to find private vendors competing for the education opportunity for those vouchers. But what's going to keep all of them in the same arena is this definition of what a public education is, of which things like Common Core, college and career ready standards are the beginning. Okay. Well, that you already know. It was amazing to me. I had a student who, she's a beginner, she's probably 27 or 28, wants to be a principal so bad she died to be a principal, and has had 4 or 5 interviews to come in second in every case. And so I've been working on it with her, and on Saturday, she said, she called and said, can we talk for a little bit? She said, I think what I'm hearing is that, number one, I don't have any experience, and number two, because I'm kind of an introvert and very soft-spoken, that I can't make tough decisions. You know, when it comes to dealing with a parent that's outraged, or a teacher who's belligerent, won't do what they're supposed to do. So how do I deal with it? I said, call me back on FaceTime. She said, you know what FaceTime is? I said, not really, but if you call me on it, I'll be on it, won't I? She said, well, yeah. So we talked on FaceTime. She lives 120 miles away. We interview the people who get into our program over Skype. It's amazing to me what this does. So, I think basically when you look about the voice-to-voice kind of things across it, my grandson plays this game, and I can't even remember which one of the video games it is, with a kid from India. And he'll get up in the morning, because it's like 3 o'clock in the morning when it's whatever, after school time with this kid, and they talk while they're playing this game. And I asked one day, I said, Isaac, who is this kid? Well, Mohammed somebody or other, and so forth, and it's amazing to me. Okay. And then it disrupts grandparents. Well, the point being is that one of the things that I think holds the adoption of technologies back in schools is this group of people that are 55 and above who don't get it and don't want to get it and can't imagine schooling looking like what we've been trying to describe here. But that generation's eventually going to be replaced by those digital immigrants who figured it out. You know, the grandma who's now on Facebook all the time, and you know, that kind of thing, who are few and far between. But right now, that's a huge drag on the implementation of technology. The Lincoln Schools just passed a big bond issue, of which a huge part of the bond issue was pervasive technology in every elementary, middle school, and high school. It's an enormous amount of money, $125 million. That's a lot of money. Well, anyway, the backlash was minimal but it was all from the age group that were the baby boomers. And the letters to the editor, all of them. How can you do this? And how do we know they're going to know their history if they're always online? Or you always make a game out of it. And it was just kind of incredible. So, what questions or comments do you have? Common Core standards are supposed to take the quality and move it up
I'll jump in one.
so that, so that every kid is college and career ready. That's that up quality thing, but they're also supposed to figure out the opportunity phase so it's there for everybody. Affordable in the sense of I can get to it, I know how to do it, I know there's help there.
You and I have been connected in other ways. 40 years ago, other than this recent piece, 40 years ago we were talking this.
Yes?
We used different words,
Yes.
but we were talking this. Mastery learning, flipped classroom, all of those words we're using. And we're only here now, 40 years later. What will be the trigger, what will be the impetus for making what you say happen?
Yeah. That is a good point, because we did have those things, and one of the reasons why they weren't pervasive is because you didn't have the technology as the catalyst to it, to make it available to everybody. And that's one of the issues, I think. The other one is we were even tighter in our connection, our coupling to that schooling model 40 years ago than we are today. I mean, we've got charter schools today. We have some states that have vouchers. There's several states that have vouchers for special ed kids and Title I kids and, that kind of thing. So, we're starting to break down that schooling model. It's not so sacred that every kid gets to go to school. I can remember a time as superintendent of schools out in Colby, if there was a high school age kid on the street during the day, I got a phone call. What's he doing? I see kids in Lincoln all the time that are high school age kids on the street, and they aren't doing, I don't know what they're doing. But I asked the superintendent, I said, do you ever get called? He said, no, we never get called. Because some of them are out on internships, some of them are on work programs, some of them are half-time at the community college, some are half-time at the university kind of thing. And I think that's part of what it is. I think we're starting to get there. But what we didn't have 40 years ago was the technology to make it happen. And I think it's there. The second reason why I think it'll happen is that generation that represents my grandson, when he gets up into high school, if you haven't flipped the classroom, those poor teachers are going to pay hell, because he's not the only kid like that. There are more kids like him than there are not like him. And you say, sit down and listen to a lecture on the Civil War, and he's going to, I can go home and look at that Civil War online and figure out, well, in fact, this happened to him. The other time he got in trouble was about 3 weeks ago because he wouldn't watch this video about clouds and how they made rain. And his father's probably a little too tolerant of some of this, I'm not going to do this behavior, but that's not my call. We did our best with our son and decided we'd give up. Anyway, he wouldn't do it. And so again, it would happen to be the day I was to go pick him up, so I had to pick him up. I had to go into the office because he was there, and he said, well, you need to go talk to his teacher. So I went up there, and I don't like this guy very much anyway. His father is a teacher, and so as a result, he couldn't go to the parent conferences, so my wife and I go to the parent-teacher conference. And this guy, I was saying, well, have you ever asked Isaac what he'd like to do? And he said to me, he said, what do you know about it? Well, yeah, he had no idea who I was, because I had been commissioner for 4 or 5 years, and he really knew a rat's rear end anyway, I think. So I don't like this guy very. Anyway, Isaac wouldn't look at this video. And so on the way home, he said, Grandma, I said, why do I always get in trouble like this? I said, well, couldn't you just watch the video? He said, what is the point? I said, all right, how do clouds make rain? He said, I watched that. I said, I watched that 2 years ago. And he goes online all the time. When he gets interested in something, he goes and finds out about it. I said, well, couldn't you tell him that you've done that? He said, he won't listen to me. He just gets mad and says, go sit down, or puts him in a safe seat, or whatever the heck the BIS program does. You do BIS stuff here, PDI. Anyway, he spends half his life, I think, in a safe seat. He's gotten to where he puts himself in the safe seat now, which I think is really interesting. And so, you know, until the school starts to adjust, and that's only gonna get worse, not better. You know, elementary teachers do tend to love the kids enough to orient things around kid stuff. But the further you go up, the more they like their content, more than they do the kids. And so the kids have to fit the content, not the content fitting the kids. And then I got to get to higher ed, they love themselves. Is that right, Harv?
That's pretty true.
I'm sorry, go ahead. You got a question? Somebody,
I just-
please.
I'm thinking about your hierarchy, you know, and the comfort level and all of that. So how do we ease our teachers to take the risk? Because I work in elementary schools in this district, and they feel very time-bound, like you showed
Yep.
in your little magical box, but they also are scared to do things so differently. I mean,
Sure.
how are we gonna make that happen?
Well, a couple of things, and none of them are magic bullets, and they're never gonna start out immediately, you know, getting them going. One is the PLC concept. Give teachers the authority and responsibility to design their own professional development, saying, we gotta put Common Core standards, we gotta put the English Language Arts Common Core standards in. Let them talk about what do they need. Instead of bringing in somebody from Nebraska to do a speech, you know, on disruptive innovations that really doesn't, you know, the January pep talk in service where you bring somebody and tells cool jokes and then leaves, that kind of, we've got to quit doing that. The second thing is the support system for that capacity. And if you're not going to provide time, you have no reason to expect that they will. And so while it's not been real popular in Lincoln, the elementary schools have teachers have one full day a month. Kids are not in school. And they do their PLC stuff, they do IEPs, they do all that kind of stuff that centers around that. So if you're not going to give them that, one of the things we did in Colby, Kansas, to support that curriculum stuff because of these very same issues, is we hired a third of the teachers every summer for 2 weeks. Paid them their per day salary. They did curriculum planning. If it was the math group, the math teachers went off and did their thing. The rest of them could do more instructional design kinds of stuff, you know, look for new resources. That you have to do that, or the expectation is unrealistic. And that's what we're not willing to do. I remember going to the legislature one year, because we have a 1,080-hour requirement for the high school, which is 186-hour days, and said, why couldn't a school district apply to the State Department for up to 3 days of that 180 if it was done for school improvement kind of things? And we outlined what those school improvement kind of things were. It got to the committee, and the older members of the Legislative Education Committee who couldn't see, kids have got to be in school. You know, what are they going to do if they're not in school? What are their parents going to do? Well, maybe their parents ought to try raising them for a while. And those 3 days, I said, we can work those around vacations and so forth. You know, but a couple of years later, what we did in the state board was said, we'll give you credit for those hours if this is what you do. So we didn't need legislative approval to do it. But you got to do that.
I just think part of the problem is that we don't have that vision.
Yep.
We don't have those videos that show us what it really does look like. I mean, we can't take teachers there. It's, you know, that's
Right.
the lack of that is, I have teachers saying, I just need to see it.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in this next session, and there's some resources that I can guide you to where now there is a lot of that stuff available online, and it's free. So if I don't ask again. Anybody else have a question? Yeah.
Oh, okay, so I don't come from a K-12 background, so this might inform my question. But I'm wondering, when we talk about student-centered everything and making things fun and doing things they're interested in, how do you see that affecting future workforce where things aren't necessarily centered on what you're interested in and what you're good at all the time? No, that's interesting, because you say career ready, so I'm curious about that, somebody listening from the outside of this kind of thing.
Learning to do what you're told is a soft skill, and you don't even have to like it.
Yeah.
Where do they learn that?
Yeah. Well, that's right. I mean, that's a career-ready piece. That's a great question. Number one is there are going to be lots of places where the expectation is that you will do your own thing at least part of the time and be paid for it. Google is a classic example. 20% of the time, these people get to use company work time to do anything they want to do. Whatever Google sells right now, they've never paid a dime for. Their people have developed these things on these time periods when they can use up to 20% to go off and think that when you talk about career ready, the notion that everything's aimed at those careers is not true. And I think you have to be realistic, and the best way to do that is to have people have internships, have practicum kinds of experience where they get out into industry, and whether it's welding or whether it's working for a farmer or whatever, to find out. You know, you don't get to choose all everything that you want to do. That sometimes where you may want to find places of choice, maybe outside of your work, and your work simply enables you to have the resources to do something else. Kind of thing. That's a great question.
Let's take 5. He's been going for an hour. So let's take 5 and, restrooms, whatever you want, water. And then he'll be right back. Let's start on, big hand on 4. My wife used to. Oh, you also need that.